have my basket of all of my herbs that I've picked from my garden. And one thing I want to do before I make my pesto is to blanch the leaves of the nettle that I picked from the backyard. This is Urtica dioica. It's a nice tall stand of nettle, and I actually had some that was already going into flower, so I thought I would harvest some of that. I'm kind of experimenting with growing nettle. We'll see how it does to cut it at a node this time of year. I'm interested to see if there's some new growth that comes out of that area where I cut it. But I want to blanch this because although I like to make my nettle pesto with raw nettles, my husband has had a histamine reaction to eating my raw nettle pesto, which has a bunch of other herbs and basil in it. But I'm going to give this a shot this time just because I'm interested to see if he has a different reaction. He says that it makes him feel like his throat's closing up a little bit. It's nothing too extreme, but I want him to enjoy the pesto and not be worried about any weird side effects. So I don't have that response at all, which is really interesting as well. We're all so different. But I'm going to just give this blanching a shot. So I'm going to be dropping the parts of the plant that I'm using for my pesto into this pot of water that I have previously boiled, and let them, you don't keep them in there for too long. You just want to kind of put them in and then take them out. And that's how you blanch the leaves of nettle. Let's see, I've got a bowl right here. And afterwards I'll have a nice pot of Herbal tisane because I have just blanched my nettle leaves in this hot water. And that's it for my nettle. I did 3 stalks. I cut it a node. Just doing a quick blanch. And then we'll now head over to the lab to make the pesto. All right, let's make some herbal pesto. You have your recipe right here on your handout, Herbal Pesto handout, but I'm going to deviate from the script a little bit. So I'm a big fan of recipe following most of the time. However, for some reason with pesto, there's just, with everything that's always switching seasons and new things coming up all the time that I want to add to it, I just have gotten used to winging it. So we're going to wing it, but feel free to always reference this recipe if you need a guide. I like to make a lot of pesto at a time because I eat a lot of pesto. It's just so good for you. It's really good at fortifying and strengthening the immune system, just giving your body the nutrients that it needs to feel healthy and function properly. So I always start with so I always like to have a lot of pesto around to put on everything. So I always add basil to my pesto, even though I did go into the garden and harvest a bunch of different fun herbs that I will show you right now. I always start with a base of a lot of basil. So I'm going to add all of my basil to my food processor, our key tool for making an herbal pesto. Lots and lots of basil. And the thing is, you can pack the food processor pretty full, because once I start to run the food processor, all of this will get really, really small, and I can add more to it. Okay, so I've got my basil in. Now let's talk about some of these other herbs that I've got here. We'll add our blanched nettles in a little bit, but right now, what else did I harvest from my garden for our weedy pesto? I've got some fennel sprigs right here. I'm going to put those in. Little carminative action there. And rosemary. So I'm just going to garble a little bit of this rosemary. And I don't like to do too much rosemary. I have 2 sprigs here. I'll save this for something else. It's a very pungent herb. It's very strong, so I don't want to overwhelm my pesto with the flavor of rosemary. I have some spearmint here. So I'm going to actually take the top off here and leave out this really thick stem. Love spearmint. I put it in everything. I've got a bunch of spearmint. It's just a nice, mild, cooling flavor that really just enhances everything. I've got some violet leaves. These beautiful heart-shaped leaves. I wouldn't be surprised if you go out into your yard and find some of your own, because they're great volunteers. They show up everywhere. And this is a lymphatic herb. We will discuss more when we talk about lymphatics. And then of course my favorite to add to pesto, I mean I love adding all of these things, but I really do love adding my dandelion leaves. They have that bitter quality to them. Harvested these out of my lawn. So I've got a bunch of dandelion leaves. If you want to stimulate those digestive juices, and a great way to do that is with your bitter herbs. So I always add some bitter component to my pesto. I have a little bit of oregano here. Actually, I have a lot of oregano here, so I'm going to garble some, but probably not use all of it. And calendula flower. Why not? Add a little color, a little antiviral action, a little beta-carotene, carotenoid action. Let's add some calendula to our pesto. And, oh, there's some more dandelion leaves in here. And I also have some thyme. So let's put a little bit of our thyme sprigs. Very teeny tiny thyme. Okay, that's it for all of the other garden herbs. And I can kind of just press all that down. And add our, so the bulk of this is going to be our blanched nettle, which is right here, looking so good, smelling so good. Our blanched nettle and our basil makes up the bulk of the greens for this project. And I've got a combination here of walnuts and pumpkin seeds. So I'm going to use that as my seedy, nutty component. I have a bunch of, this is basically one squeezed lemon here, so I have that. I'll add that in. And I have 2 garlic cloves, which I prefer to press with my garlic press. I heard once from another herbalist how pressing the garlic is the best way to activate the garlic. Something about shoving all of the molecules together makes it more potent. So I've been pressing garlic ever since. I'm going to do 2 cloves. Oh, yummy. And this is, of course, going to end up being raw garlic in your pesto. So if that does not settle well in your stomach, then you could maybe roast your garlic or cook your garlic for a little bit before you add it to your pesto. Okay, and you want to add a little salt to taste. And I would start with less and lead to more, because I've overdone the salt on my pesto before. Right now I'm going to start with about a teaspoon's worth. This is a Himalayan salt. And then finally I will add my olive oil. So another one that I don't necessarily measure as I make my pesto, I just kind of start pouring it on. You definitely need a lot of olive oil for your pesto. In fact, as it sits, I mean, I wouldn't go overboard, but as it sits and is stored while it's being eaten, the olive oil protects it from over-oxidizing and growing mold on the surface. So definitely want it to be nice and oily, and that'll help to kind of grab all of this plant material and move it through as you're running the processor. So now I've got all of my ingredients in my food processor and I'm ready to go. Here we go. I'm going to watch this, and if it's not moving the way that I want it to, it's going to get loud in here, but if I'm not seeing it grab at the material the way I want it to, I'm just going to start adding more olive oil. Amazing. Wish you were here. One more. Okay, let's give it a taste. See how we're doing. If we need to add any salt. There's just so much zap that happens when you add all these other ingredients to it. There's so many great like warming, stimulating constituents that we've introduced because of the rosemary and because of the oregano and the thyme. And then there's some cooling constituents from the spearmint. It's really a taste explosion. It's pretty incredible. So I hope you never see pesto the same again, because it's just a canvas that's here for you to create with whatever you want. It just depends on where you are in the season with what type of herbs you're going to add to your pesto. So right now we added fennel, we added oregano and thyme. Of course, all of your garden herbs that you have accessible to you all year round are great to add to your pesto. But there are some spring edible greens that we missed because they're already past. So you can always also add things like cleavers, chickweed, and one of my personal favorites, which is the 3/4 leek or a wild onion. And so those are all really great additions as well. There's nasturtiums growing in my yard, which I would have added today, but we have roofers working on that area of my house, so it was covered in roof dust. There's just, I mean, the sky's the limit. So get creative. Make sure that it's something you know is an edible herb before you add it to your pesto. Make sure you're identifying it correctly. But definitely play around with all these fun, delicious, earthly treats and add them to your pesto. I'm going to put a little bit on a cracker and enjoy. Oh my God, so good. Oh, one more thing. I did not add cheese. Totally great idea. Parmesan, just dump it in as much as you want to add. I just kind of go with the vegan option. I find that it actually lasts a little bit longer if I don't add cheese. Yes, that might be one of my best yet.